This is an overview of the relationship between GE Healthcare and SUSE and how it has become a strategic support and collaboration arrangement. My name is Andy Peed. I am a senior staff engineer at GE Healthcare and the lead program architect for our OS provisioning organization.
And I am Thomas Keeley with SUSE Consulting on permanent assignment at GE Healthcare. And if I use the term we, it's a little confusing. I could be talking about GE Healthcare, I could be talking about SUSE Consulting, I could be talking about both. I'll do my best to clarify.
We'll go through a brief introduction to who we are, which we've already done, and what GE Healthcare is, and then look at implementations of how we've brought this relationship into being. We'll take a quick look at interactions between our two companies and then discuss the benefits and what we produce along the way. Introductions. We're GE Healthcare. We are a medical device manufacturer with a pretty large presence around the globe. These are some numbers. All of these are pretty publicly available if you go looking for them, so I'm not going to dwell on them in specific. We've got four major business uh, sectors. I will be speaking mostly about imaging, as that is where I work. I have a little bit of interaction with patient care solutions, and they are also coming into the SUSE relationship, so we will touch on that very briefly. And then we also have ultrasound, which is its own set of medical devices, most of which are currently Windows-based, but some of which are moving into the Linux world. And then pharmaceutical diagnostics, which is not computer-based at all. Remember this phrase, we are driven by our purpose to create a world where healthcare has no limits. That is our mantra and pretty much what we dwell upon. And it is actually quite relevant to how we work with SUSE. We started all this back in approximately 2008 with a internally managed Linux distribution based upon OpenSUSE 11.1, which was called CSE Linux. That grew and was used by one product line in particular, but it became evident fairly quickly that Linux distribution management is hard and not our scope of expertise. So we went to SUSE and said, hey, give us a hand. And SUSE, being wonderful people that they are, were quite happy to step up to the bat and help us out. And they shifted us over to a highly tuned collection derived from SUSE Linux Enterprise Server 11, and then later migrated that to 12. And all three of these flavors were, and actually in the last case still are, used by computer tomography or CT products. And this was the case for, a little bit more than a decade here. Other imaging organizations shifted off to other Linux distributions, also managed internally. But in 2019, we realized that having this many flavors knocking about was not optimal. And we turned back to SUSE as the primary provider of a Linux-based operating system for consumption across all of GE Healthcare's imaging products. This, in addition to computer tomography, this included MRI, PET, X-ray, women's health, surgery, and interventional. Fluoroscopy is also included in that collection. Nowadays, in 2024, we have SUSE products starting to be picked up by patient care systems platforms and the second business segment coming online. Back in the dirty old CSE Linux days, and then SUS 11 and SUS 12 flavors, this was very much a classic vendor-customer relationship. SUSE did all the work as far as maintaining the operating system and all of our demands regarding it. We took very few updates when they were presented to us, and even then, upgraded from one service pack to another, only very rarely. This was a very highly customized operating system distribution down to adopting only specific updates and not even the typical updates that were coming into the main flow of the distribution. It was also highly configured for our purposes. This sort of high degree of control wasn't really feasible to bring to a broader audience. So we made the very conscious decision up front to use SLES 15 off the shelf. What this means, in effect, is that each business unit within imaging is obligated to work much more closely and cohesively with each other and with SUSE to manage the operating system artifacts that they use, the packages, and as they discover needs or wants, um, collaborate with each other and then with SUSE to make sure that their needs are coherent across the organization and with what SUSE is planning to do strategically over time. Um, because of this, we have actively sought to shape the updates going into SLES 15 and have some input into the versioning and the versions that are used of key components, for example, the kernel, GCC, Python, and so forth, from one SP to the next as we continue to use SLES 15 over the years. What this means also then is that we have an internal organization to propagate SLES 15 into the GE healthcare world. And at this point, I think I'll turn it over to Thomas, who can give more specific detail of how that's implemented.
Okay. Basically, GE Healthcare has decided to do, as Andy pointed out, a distribution of SLEDs internally. To do so, we utilize SUSE Manager, pulling updates from SUSE Support Center, and we have proxies in various far-flung locations so that we can overcome issues like space, speed, network issue, etc. The actual development then is pulled directly from the SUSE Manager repositories instead of having to register the servers with SUSE Manager because their development and the systems come and go as the developers need it. They will rebuild. So they leverage the repositories without leveraging the provisioning aspects of SUSE Manager. This allows them to actually do basically two offerings to their developers. They follow SUSE's distribution of the service packs, of course, starting with 15 Service Pack 1, but it also allows them to run for their own testing. They're a point in time copy of the service pack and the quarterly updates that SUSE publishes. This allows them to do the extended testing that is required for compliance and other uh, requirements within the medical field. And both of these offerings are to the developer the what they call the curated version of the system, which has gone through extensive testing beyond what SUSE does with any of their releases, as well as the upstream product that SUSE pushes out by SUSE Support Center directly, customer care. Um, the curation that they do is a set of tests in-house and at SUSE that are specific to GE Healthcare. This includes things like performance baselining and going into so far as some basic tests that helps them build their content manifest and documentation of compliance. The content manifest is a large group of documents, including all the packages that go into a product, any sort of updates, issues, and includes license information, the change logs of all the products, and any sort of release notes. Um, it is a long, big product that is based on the testing that they do in this curation, but the content manifest itself is a little bit beyond my scope because it's confusing, and I'm going to hand it back to Andy to cover.
The content manifest grew out of a internal software development lifecycle deliverable called the design history file, which is an extremely detailed history of how any given software component was brought to fruition from uh, initial concept exploration into productization and inclusion into the product. Since we don't have that sort of scope and involvement in SUSE's process and production process, we have opted to gather a collection of similar components and pull them into what we call an interoperable design history file. These are all uh, items that do get referenced by the GE Healthcare product design teams as they implement their software and interface to the OS. Um, a couple things to call out specifically are the update assessment, which is a collection of SUSE issued errata, which consists of details of package updates, as well as calling out attention to links at SUSE that provide more specific information about each update, and links to resolved CVEs or security issues. Each of these updates are reviewed weekly in a series of anomaly reviews, and I'll get into that a little bit later. The other item that is worth calling out at this point is the vulnerability reports. We do a typical OS installation, which reflects the major aspects of the operating systems used by all of the product groups within the imaging organization. And we run a Nessus scan against that installation and get a report on any outstanding vulnerabilities. Those are typically pretty clean. But where there are findings, we point to the appropriate fixes where they are available, typically in what Thomas has already described as the upstream collection. And then our product groups are able to pull those updates specifically as needed.
The one other thing that's included is also the EULA, for the licensing that is specific to what GE Healthcare's development can use and distribute with their products. And that also is included in this package.
So how do we manage all of this? Well, we have a number of meetings and mechanisms in place. As far as communicating needs and wants to SUSE, you know them, you love them. They're called service requests, and we lean into that mechanism a lot. This is not anything new, I think, for the audience. What may be a little unusual in the way we handle them is that we have a core team of people here at GE Healthcare, myself and a coworker and Thomas here, who take a look at every request coming in as a proposed update or bug report and say, what's the skinny, what's the actual situation going on. So we triage every potential issue headed to SUSE. And once we have identified that it is a specific bug or sometimes a feature, we will gather the pertinent data, which also almost always includes a support config file, and then we'll open the SR and send it on its merry way. Where the request is a feature, we typically communicate those via SUSE's Jira construct, and those get worked separately within SUSE. And then here's the back reference to the GE Healthcare Anomaly Review. This is, as I said, a review of all the incoming changes, and we look at how each change potentially impacts GE Healthcare products and what actions may be needed to take to integrate that change cleanly. Usually that may consist of calling out specific types of regression testing that may be involved and or configuration changes that are likely to be needed. From a communication perspective, we've got a number of mechanisms as well. We sit down with our SUSE support staff and other key folks at SUSE on a weekly basis to look at everything that's currently being worked, all the open SIs, all the current feature requests, and any upcoming meetings or communications that involve SUSE folks. We have a biweekly business sync, which is where our SUSE account manager sits down with our sourcing folks and also the guy who holds the purse strings, or at least recommends how the money be spent. And we look at the contractual items in play because our contract is in a nearly constant state of, if not active flux, at least negotiation. Um, so as new teams come on with new needs for other SUSE products, those things get described in this meeting. As as projects come up with requests for extended support in the realm of long-term support or reactive support, those things come up in this meeting. Um, every 6 weeks or roughly thereabouts, we have a roundtable discussion where I and usually our program or partner technology managers sit down and describe the current roadmap for SUSE products coming down the pike and GE Healthcare's distribution of those. And we report on that situation to GE Healthcare stakeholders. This meeting is primarily aimed at project and program managers so that they know what's coming down the pike and how to plan for it. It does not typically consist of terribly technical information. That gets thrown at the weekly troubleshooting forum. That is a gathering of, again, our SUSE support staff and the key technical staff here at GE Healthcare. And these are all folks who are bringing specific examples and experiences. Hey, I ran into this. And as often as not, other folks here at GE Healthcare can say, oh yeah, I saw that, and this is what we did. Um, every now and then we do all agree that, yep, that's an issue, and then we will pursue opening an SR if appropriate. Once a month, we have SUSE deep dive discussions. These are specific technical scenarios or technical functionalities that we have encountered or have had issues with and gone to SUSE and said, can we sit down with a subject matter expert? And we will then dig into these technical topics into a pretty deep level. And that allows us to then leverage that knowledge going forward.
And the nice thing with this is we've been able to pull in SUSE engineers or full-on developers to these meetings to actually sit with the GE healthcare developers and talk out not only is the goal for the product to work this way, but we also would like it to work this way, and the engineers get an inside view at that point.
Yep. Where we need to, we sit down with other vendors to troubleshoot specific integration or interface issues. We have done these with SUSE and Intel, and SUSE and NVIDIA, and SUSE and Lenovo. I can think of right off the top of my head. These don't happen often, but they are invariably incredibly valuable when they do. Finally, I've got ad hoc focus discussions here. These are typically aimed at a specific problem or a specific project which needs technical support from SUSE in a more detailed arena than, say, anybody here at GE Healthcare can offer. Those happen very rarely, but again, they're terribly valuable when they happen. We also get in each other's face. SUSE comes out here to GE Healthcare a couple times a year. This has typically been a very casual meeting in the spring. Couple days, we just grab us a conference room and park the support folks there, and people stop by as they are able to with questions, comments, concerns, or an opportunity to meet and greet. Occasionally, we will schedule discussions with specific teams about specific issues. Um, but it does in all revolve mostly around technical topics. In the fall, we typically have had a longer visit from SUSE with support and business staff, and this is more of a summit discussion with specific topics scheduled for time slots and a lot of people participating from both sides. This year was a first in that GE Healthcare went to visit SUSE. Thomas and myself went to Nuremberg this immediately after SUSECon this year, and had 2 days of fairly intensive discussions on several topics, which proved to be very useful simply because not only did we talk about things we had planned to talk about, we had a number of very useful pickup discussions with folks who met us in the hallway or over lunch. All of this boils down to a lot of face-to-face and interaction time. To throw out some numbers here, 115 meetings over the course of a year, which is nearly 3 or more a week. Uh, Better than 300 hours in discussion, committed time to discussion. A lot of requests going back and forth here. And interactions. This is probably the deepest and most collaborative relationship I've ever been involved in. 24 people roughly, and these are probably conservative numbers, at SUSE, ranging from the support staff down to, as Thomas already mentioned, uh, real life developers with their hands elbow deep in the code, and certainly more than 100 folks here in GE Healthcare getting a chance to talk to SUSE and get firsthand, face-on interaction with that level of technical expertise. Who's involved? Well, our product technology manager is Mark Cowley. All of these are the SUSE folks. And Tyrell and Brian are our support engineers. I think premium is not a good enough superlative for the service that they've given us. Brad is our service delivery manager, and James is our support manager who kind of stands behind him. And Brian's the guy we go to when we're really confused and are not sure what direction we're going to go next. Dan is our sales executive, our account guy, and then, of course, Thomas is our consultant on site. And he is probably the guy who gets the most face time from SUSE or from the SUSE perspective. And every problem and project and issue tends to come to him first, perhaps much to his chagrin.
Once it's filtered through you and Steve, yes, I would say.
On the GE Healthcare side, there's myself, my cohort, and co-brain, Steve Berman, Um, our product security guy is Christian Holtz, who kind of has a view into everything that we do from a product perspective, both in terms of integrating SUSE in to GE healthcare programs, but also from what gets produced at GE healthcare and what has to be kept in mind when we're talking to SUSE. Bo Pedersen, my boss, is our Senior Director of Compute Engineering. He leads the imaging organization in terms of giving some view into what effort is being put into the compute platforming activities, and he's also the guy who suggests how the money should be spent. Brandon Pike is our sourcing manager and kind of coordinates all of the product purchasing that we do with SUSE into the bigger GE healthcare picture, so that when other organizations at GE healthcare start talking about picking up SUSE products, he's aware of it immediately and able to loop everybody into the same conversation. So what's come out of all this? Well, once upon a time, we had a lot of SUSE distributions, or I'm sorry, Linux distributions being thrown around in-house. There was a lot of activity going on. This part of the slide is hard to read, and it's a deliberate choice because it was hard to manage. At about 2019, we said, hey, this is hard to manage. And we turned to SUSE and brought in SLUS 15. And that got us a collection of superheroes from SUSE who were able to take everything that we were doing and start to make it make sense. And more importantly, provide a buffer and an interface to all the activity that goes on in the open source community. So SUSE kind of brings a lot of sanity and order to a lot of the confusion that we were dealing with. That has enabled us to move from a very large monolithic approach to operating systems management into a much more modularized approach. We have been able to pick up technologies much more quickly than we were able to in the past. And we've also, out of that relationship with SUSE, gotten a much broader exposure to how Linux is being used in the industry. Because SUSE already has such a large audience and use base, we know that we have a much more implicitly stable operating system, simply because there's so much use and testing and documentation going on behind the scenes by the time we get our hands on it. And SUSE's long-term support philosophy provides an ongoing stability for the operating system or throughout, I should say, our product development, because our product development cycles typically run 1 to 2 years. And where with nearly any other operating system in hand, we would have to freeze at some point and not change for a significant part of that development cycle. SUSE is able to keep critical changes coming in as we need them. We have also been able to leverage SUSE tool sets and environments. The SUSE Manager is probably the shining example here. And the capabilities that are offered by AutoYast in our install philosophy. We're also starting to move into the Kiwi space and leveraging that quite a lot. We've been able to bring in a applied STIG profile at install time by partnering with SUSE, and we have leveraged their solid driver programs initially for STIG profiles, but also now starting to for our own drivers for the parts that we use and integrate into our systems. We use the S certification as a philosophy of improving the operating system for the confidence level of our consuming or teams here in GE Healthcare uh, by applying essentially that YES certification suite to every collection of operating system across a wide, well, it's what, 12 systems now, 12 representative platforms that SUSE executes testing on for us. And we are also beginning to leverage the generated SBOM content into our own software bill of materials that we publish. SUSE, in return, I think gets a better understanding of how we use their products and how other companies use their products in the real world. They get a much better sense of limitations of their current operating system artifacts and specific applications. GE Healthcare tends to push the intent and the design of a couple key ones, probably X and NVIDIA drivers being the most obvious ones as I think about it. And SUSE also gets a better sense, I think, of the roadmap needs, again, for key components. Um, it's very tempting to look at the upstream plans for something like Python and say, yeah, we can follow that. But, you know, we here at GE Healthcare may not necessarily agree with those plans. So we're able to take that information to SUSE. SUSE brings the infinite potential of the open source to the enterprise, which allows GE Healthcare to create a world where healthcare has no limits. See, I told you we'd come back to that. From a collaboration perspective, the big thing I think we've been able to create together has been that install time implementation of SIG profiles. That was a big win, I think, for both sides of the table. We recently proposed and got accepted some improvements to your support config tool, which allows a greater degree of documentation of what a specific support config is related to in regards to, say, a given product or a given development team. SUSE and GE Healthcare have worked together to create and refine summary scripts that are now generating material that go into your release notes. The first thing we did when we sat down with SUSE back in 2019 was to ask SUSE to take over the maintenance and propagation of a couple specific updates that we had for FVWM. And SUSE was quite happy to pull that in, and now we are no longer having to worry about that ourselves because, as I said before, software package distribution and maintenance is hard, and it's not really our wheelhouse. So we were quite happy to give that over to SUSE and the experts who can do it for us. We have fed back on several occasions driver enhancement requests to NVIDIA that SUSE and NVIDIA were able to collaborate upon. And Thomas here has had all kinds of requests and improvements and suggestions for SUSE Manager over the years. I wanted to close with a bit of a mantra of mine that I put on every email that I send to GE Healthcare and SUSE. And it's something that we try to keep in mind here. And I think it's something that kind of is part and parcel of how SUSE works. And that is that in a technology industry, existence is change. Survival is the ability to adapt to that change, which means that mastery is the ability to create, direct, mitigate, and leverage change. And we should strive for mastery. And SUSE helps us do exactly that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening and attending.